Hello, pro wrestling fans. This is your buddy Mike Messier. It's turned out to be a sad day, June 7th, 2023. As you've probably heard by now, the wrestler known as the Iron Sheik, Hussein Arab, and of course, Colonel Mustafa. All those were his gimmick names, but the guy was no gimmick. He was a real life shooter, meaning he could kick pretty much anybody's ass in wrestling, outside of wrestling. Probably a handful of exceptions to that rule for the Iron Sheik. But I just want to share some condolences to his family and his friends and his fans, of which I am one, and just share some personal anecdotes about my viewership of the Iron Sheik, my enjoyment of his career. If you want the personal rundown or the achievements, the Wikipedia page is fine. I'm Bill Apter of Pro Wrestling Illustrated, the Apter magazines, and all the great things Bill Apter's done. I know he's already been doing a podcast about this unfortunate turn of events. So I'm not going to give just the career breakdown, except to say just some real quick highlights. Of course, we know the Iron Sheik, probably best known for defeating Bob Backlund, December 26, 1983, Madison Square Garden. I was a young child just getting into wrestling through my family. And there was, on where I lived in the suburbs of Virginia, George Michael, who was, a mainstream sports reporter. You might remember the Sports Machine with George Michael. He was a big wrestling fan, and he had a little teaser at the 6 o'clock news. New WWF champion crown. Tune in at 11. So it was one of those deals where this is pre-VCR, pre-DVD-R. If you weren't awake at 11 o'clock, you weren't going to find out what the fuck happened. So, I remember being a kid and having to, it was probably, I guess it was Christmas break when this happened. So I don't think I had to sneak to see it. It was just stayed up late. Of course, they say 11 o'clock. By the time they get around to the news, it's 11:20. And I was fully expecting them to just say something like, he said new WWF champion. I didn't take that to mean the world title that Bob Backlund had for years. I thought he was going to say something like Tito Santana's just beaten Magnificent Morocco for the WWF Intercontinental title. That's what I was expecting to see, or maybe some type of tag team title change, perhaps. But I was not expecting to find out that Bob Backlund had actually lost. And, fans today get very excited about Roman Reigns' 1,000-day reign. But he's really just about, 50 or 60% to what Bob Backlund accomplished with his 6 years, basically almost full 6 years. I think 5 years and 10 months. So for the Iron Sheik to win that title, yes, the angle between those two had just started with the Persian clubs. If you're not familiar with that, the Iron Sheik, among many things he brought to the table, were these Persian clubs that you had to swing over your head in order to do the exercise. And basically he was challenging jobbers, squash guys, to do this and then beating them up when they couldn't do it in their match. And then Bob Backlund, the champion, came out and he was trying to swing the clubs, and the Sheik attacked him and weakened up his back, and then they had the Madison Square Garden match. Now, many people would jump right from the Iron Sheik winning the title to a month later when he lost it to Hulk Hogan. But I'm going to actually go inside of his title reign a little bit, the Iron Sheik's title reign, for some personal stuff that you won't hear from anybody else most likely today or in the following weeks, because I actually saw an Iron Sheik title defense live and in person. I'm probably one of the couple of thousands of people still alive that actually saw that. But basically, the Iron Sheik had the title. He had, I would say, pretty close to white hot heat, meaning dangerous heat. I mean, he was, Iran was not a popular country in the United States at the time. We were still kind of coming over, hostage situations, all types of things with Iran. I believe at the time there was this Iran-Iraq war going on that was very heated. And so for this character to just be a representation of Iran in 1983, 1984, when the height of Ronald Reagan patriotism and Born in the USA, although that's got a duality to it, the song by Bruce Springsteen, Mary Lou Retton, all this Americana stuff was just really in full force. And for today's younger people, I don't know if they can imagine a world of such patriotism. The only thing I could compare it to is just shortly after 9/11 back in 2001, but that's over 20 years ago at this point. So I don't know if the kids today who weren't around for that era could even conceive how proud people were of the United States. It was like, we are the best, we're number one, McDonald's, Olympics, fucking everything. And I was going to say Michael Jordan, he came in a little bit later on the national scene, but the point is, everything American was loved and everything anti-American was truly hated, even in pro wrestling. And so the Iron Sheik was really a character on the edge in 1984, and I'll get into how they kind of softened him a little bit with the cartoons and stuff. But the Iron Sheik in January of '84, the WWF actually had a house show, meaning a non-televised show. This show is not even listed anywhere on the internet, but it was somewhere around January 6th of 1984. The WWF did a show at a 5-match card at the Fairfax High School gym in Fairfax, Virginia. Now, this was not, I did not go to this school, but this was a school that friends of mine eventually ended up going to. And this was a high school or a middle school type of thing, Fairfax High School gym. Maybe 1,000 people at the most were in this place, but it was pretty packed. And it had kind of a pretty good card for a 5-match card. I believe it was, the opener was Bob Bradley defeated Paul Butcher Vachon. I think Paul Orndorff beat B. Brian Blair. I want to say Tito Santana beat Swede Hansen. And the 4th match on the show was a world title match. The Iron Sheik defended the title against Chief Jay Strongbow. You might be wondering, well, what was the main event? Jimmy Snuka and Sergeant Slaughter went to a double countout, and it was not a particularly good match, the Slaughter-Snuka match. Slaughter was a few weeks away from turning babyface, as we know. But going back to this, the 4th match on the show was really the workmanship match. Chief Jay Strongbow still had a few good years left in him before he became a full-time agent. Jay Strongbow was still very popular. I mean, a holdover from the 70s. My friend Nikita, Breznikov is a big Jay Strongbow fan. They'll tell you, him and Evan Ginsberg will tell you all day how popular Jay Strongbow was. My friend Steve Feinberg up in Rhode Island was a big Jay Strongbow fan. Everyone loved Jay Strongbow. So even in January of '84, immensely popular Jay Strongbow, and people actually thought, well, maybe this is finally the Chief's turn to win the title. He's just coming off this tag team title reign with his brother Jules. He's been around forever. He's been the number 2 babyface. We were still a week or two away from Hogan coming back, so we had no idea what was going to happen. So we actually thought that there might be a fucking chance of Jay Strongbow winning the WWF World title at this Fairfax High School gym in front of 1,000 people in 1984. It's just a different era. Maybe I was so young, the cynicism wasn't there yet, or the smart markiness of the whole thing. But, kind of hoping to see a title change. And I think these guys, Iron Sheik and Strongbow, actually went on it for about 17 minutes. You got to think at the time I was doing the math. I think the Iron Sheik had to be about 40 by the time he's having his world title reign. And Jay Strongbow was probably 50 or 52. So, these guys really had a great match, all things considered, and really entertaining. And interestingly enough, the Iron Sheik did retain on a pinfall, but he did not use the camel clutch for the submission, which was kind of interesting. I think he did like a double neck thrust, like just a thrust to the trapeze, to the neck area of Strongbow, and then pinned him. And I remember just like the match was actually really good from the memories I have of it. And the Sheik, the Iron Sheik, had great heat. I do want to clarify one thing that I think most wrestling fans know. There was another great wrestler. I think his real name was Eddie Farhat, I believe. Sabu's uncle, the original Sheik, or just the Sheik, he had a great career too. Sometimes there's confusion, and I think the guys that made the Iron Sheik documentary kind of made a mistake, you know, although the doc is great, but they named that documentary The Sheik, and for wrestling fans, there was the Sheik, totally different guy from Michigan, much different, you know, style, you know, taking pencils to people's heads. I don't really know if the Sheik and the Iron Sheik ever crossed paths, but I just want to clarify, this is the Iron Sheik that we're talking about today. I do remember when the Iron Sheik passed away, the original Sheik passed away too. That's going back quite some time to 2003. But let's go back to the Iron Sheik and this title defense. Just the heat in this high school gym was big. I mean, just people were just not appreciating the Iron Sheik for what he was. But they were, in a sense, because they hated him. And that's what he wanted. And that's in the days, folks, for old-time wrestling fans. And I know the young fans probably get sick of hearing this stuff. But guys just then did not fear getting heat. They embraced it. They lived it. They, quote, lived the gimmick. And the Iron Sheik, you know, along with Roddy Piper, Nikolai Volkov, even, you know, Big John Studd, maybe to a lesser extent, they all lived the heat. They all lived the gimmick, so to speak. So I can proudly say, you know, and this is one of my nuggets of wrestling fandom that I hold on to. You know, you can watch my Crockett Cups 87 video. A lot of great things I've seen in wrestling live. And to be able to say that I saw the Iron Sheik defend the WWF title live is definitely one of those highlights. And then, of course, you know, like I said, just a few weeks later, George Michael, the Sports Machine, was back at it. Hey, folks, breaking news. We have a new WWF champion. Tune in tonight at 11. Now, at this point, I clearly remember that, you know, it was past my bedtime, as they say. But luckily for me, I had a TV in my room. And if I kept the volume at a certain low level, and if I didn't put any lights on, I could pop the TV on, keep the volume at a low level, tune in, and find out what the hell was going on with this new champion. This is before the internet. This is before 900 numbers. This is old school shit. Thank God for George Michael. You know, I've seen some wrestling people shit on George Michael, and they think he disrespected wrestling. I totally disagree. I think he loved it, and he was straddling a line between being a serious news reporter. At the time, you know, he was getting a lot of shit legitimately for being a wrestling advocate, but he pushed it forward. And tuning in at 11 o'clock, you know, waiting till 11:20, and then seeing the highlights of basically Hulk Hogan beating the Iron Sheik. And this was a school night. I'm assuming maybe it was the actual night that he won the title, because if that, I can't remember that night. Was it January 23rd, 1984? Was that a Monday night Madison Square Garden show? I believe Madison Square Garden ran Monday nights for decades. So yeah, it could have been that same night, but Hogan fucking wins the title. I'm watching this thing. I can't believe it. You know, Hogan was new to the WWF. I had seen him in some of the wrestling magazines coming out of the AWA. But here he was. He was our new champion, and, you know, that's pulled the trigger. Now, of Hulkamania and WrestleMania and everything that followed. And then, from there, as they would say, guess what happens? The Capitol Center, Landover, Maryland. This was my home arena as a kid. Not the Fairfax High School gym, but the Capitol Center is where the monthly WWF matches happened. They come back in January, late January. Might have actually been February or March, actually, by the time they got around. Yeah, it was probably March, I think early March, 1984. The big rematch, Hulk Hogan defending his newly won World Wrestling Federation heavyweight title against the Iron Sheik, special guest ring announcer George Michael from the Sports Machine. So this motherfucker, George Michael, not that this is the George Michael tribute, but he was just a big part of it in that local area. And yes, this is the days, folks. Yes, cable TV was taking over and all this horse shit. But even back then, you still had a local flavor sometimes. And sometimes they would bring in a local celebrity like George Michael, who was an advocate for wrestling, for the WWF and for the NWA. They got him to be a ring announcer, and he did it. And he did, from what I remember, he did quite fine. And the match, another thing the old school wrestling fans, WWF fans remember, is that the main event did not go on last at this show. what they would do is they'd have the main event, the world title match, like 5th on the show right before intermission. And then when they came back from intermission, they could, shockingly announce that another rematch had been set up for the next month. So I think they did a deal. From what I remember, the Sheik was disqualified in this rematch, so they probably did have another rematch the next month at the Capitol Center. I'm sure Hogan and the Iron Sheik did plenty of rematches. Interestingly enough, I remember reading in the wrestling magazines that a year after, so January of '85, Hogan had the title for a full year. They actually did a reunion tour of rematches again. Hogan and the Iron Sheik had like a 1-year anniversary tour of rematches. Look, obviously Hogan was over, and we know that guys like Roddy Piper was over huge as a heel, and you had the Mr. T's and so forth, the Paul Orndorff, so many big stars back then, larger than life, Andre the Giant. Don't want to leave anybody out, but the Iron Sheik more than held his own. And in the interim, the Iron Sheik, losing this title to Hulk Hogan, you might think, okay, he's got to go away for a while. He's going to be buried on the card. No. The Iron Sheik went directly into another huge feud, bigger than the Hogan feud, really. A huge feud with Sergeant Slaughter, which lasted, I want to say, about 6 months. And it was really well done because the Sheik was just coming off this title loss. He was very upset. He was adamant about getting his title back from Hogan, and then they did this thing that was really interesting. Basically, the Iron Sheik was leaving the ring the way that I remember it. Sergeant Slaughter, who was still a heel, was going towards the ring, and the two heels, heel Slaughter, but he's still a proud Marine, American, and Iron Sheik, who's the defeated champion, he's pissed off, he wants his title back, he's with Freddie Blassie. I should have mentioned Classy Freddie Blassie, or Sheik Freddie Blassie at the time, was the manager for the Iron Sheik. That was a big deal for Freddie Blassie as a heel manager. I think that's the first singles champion he managed, was the Iron Sheik. And the Iron Sheik and Sergeant Slaughter are having this stare down, and it's who's going to give way first. And it was kind of inconclusive, like kind of the end of King Kong versus Godzilla, if you ever saw that one. But finally, these two guys couldn't hold back, and they started a fucking feud, and this feud lasted deep into the year 1984. It gave the Iron Sheik something to do. It kind of kept him away from Hogan for a while. They brought in Nikolai Volkov as a Russian who was also anti-American. Do you mind? And so they had this wonderful feud, which was sometimes Sergeant Slaughter would have to bring in a guest, like a friend. Sometimes it was guys like Andre the Giant, would team up with Sergeant Slaughter against Nikolai Volkov and the Iron Sheik at house shows. I don't know if they ever did Slaughter and Hogan against Sheik and Volkov, but that match I just said right there, I don't think they ever did it. That could have been your WrestleMania 1 main event, or it definitely could have main evented a Saturday Night's Main Event, which was on the horizon. That didn't happen yet till May of '85. And by that time, unfortunately, for everybody really, Sergeant Slaughter and the WWF had a big falling out. Slaughter had worked a deal with G.I. Joe, Hasbro, for his name and likeness. Vince McMahon, of course, Junior McMahon, a control freak that he was and still is, didn't want Slaughter to get money outside of the WWF for these action figures, and so Sarge was gone. Before WrestleMania 1, a lot of guys who really you think would have been on WrestleMania 1, guys that laid the foundation, the Wild Samoans, Roman Reigns' father and uncle, they should have been at WrestleMania 1. Rocky Johnson, I think, Tony Atlas should have been on that show. Magnificent Morocco should have been on that show. But anyway, Slaughter was gone. The Iron Sheik, however, he was still doing his thing. Now he's in a tag team with Nikolai Volkov, and they're challenging Barry Windham and Mike Rotundo, a couple of guys who were the WWF Tag Team Champions. They still had, to me, felt like NWA guys. I don't know if the WWF in that initial run with Windham and Rotundo, I'm not sure how well of a job they did. They gave them the belts, I know that, but did they really do a great job of getting those guys over? I don't think so. I think maybe if Windham and Rotundo had feuded with Sheik and Volkov before they won the belts, it would have been better, but that's not how they did things. Windham and Rotundo had beaten Dick Murdoch and Adrian Adonis, another kind of, at the time, felt very NWA-ish, territory-ish. So Wyndham and Rotundo beat the champions, who really didn't even feel like WWF guys to me, Murdoch and Adonis, and they didn't feel like WWF guys, Wyndham and Rotundo, but they were. They were officially under contract. They were the tag team champions. They were coming out once again to that Duality song, Born in the USA. And that's your first title change. It's either the first or second overall title change at any WrestleMania. The Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov beating Wyndham and Rotundo for the WWF World Tag Team title. The other title change on that show was the women's title. Leilani Kai dropped the title to Wendy Richter. And I can't remember, to be honest with you, which match came first on the show. I want to say that Sheik and Volkov beating Wyndham and Rotundo came first. So if that's the case, I believe how it ended was the Iron Sheik hit Blassie, tossed the cane to the Sheik. The Sheik hit Barry Windham on the back of the neck with the fucking cane, and then Nikolai scored the pin on Windham. I think that match came first on the show. So if any pundits want to chime in on that. So really the first title fucking change at any WrestleMania the Iron Sheik's involved in. So I'm just telling you, he was involved in some pretty big shit. People just think of him as a transitional champ. I think that's what the cliff notes, like the fucking Twitter fucks, are gonna harp on today and tomorrow, and for, you know, when they talk about the Iron Sheik, oh, he was the transitional guy between Bob Backlund and Hulk Hogan. Yes, but so much goddamn more, and that's why we're here, for a real fucking history lesson, okay? Not a Twitter fucking cliff notes goddamn version. Real fucking wrestling history that you get when you talk wrestling with me, or I talk wrestling and you listen, however you want to phrase it. So then we move forth. Iron Sheik sticking around, you know, Slaughter's gone. They bring in this Corporal Kirshner fucking guy. You know, what an interesting life he's had. You know, the future Leatherface. Corporal Kirshner comes in as the substitute guy, feuding with the Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov. Nikolai Volkov gets the nod, gets the singles match, the flag match at WrestleMania 2 against Kirshner, but the Iron Sheik's put in the 20-man battle royal at WrestleMania 2. Actually a really pretty star-studded affair. You know, Bruno Sammartino's the guy that eliminated the Iron Sheik from that one. But just the fact that the Iron Sheik, Big John Studd, they're in the same ring with William Refrigerator Perry and all these, you know, Bill Fralick and was Dick Butkus in that one, or is he a referee or something? But I mean, just a pretty, Ed Too Tall Jones, I think, was involved. Pretty impressive company, really, for everybody. I want to say a young Haku was in that WrestleMania 2 Battle Royal as well, but very impressive. Iron Sheik did not win. He comes back, you know, apparently McMahon Jr. wanted to have Sheik and Volkov regain the titles when the British Bulldogs were going to lose them because Dynamite Kid was injured, but Dynamite Kid said he would not lose the titles to anyone but the Hart Foundation because of the ties between the Bulldogs and the Harts. You know, so I mean, we could have had a whole other reign of Sheik and Volkov, but we did not. Instead, Sheik and Volkov were in there at WrestleMania 3. The match right before Hogan and Andre is the Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov against the Killer Bees. The match was pretty good for a few minutes, but then there's some interference by Hacksaw Jim Duggan. He hits fucking the Iron Sheik with a 2x4. We could go down this whole rabbit hole of Duggan and the Sheik and the fucking getting arrested. Suffice to say, those guys made an error. They made a mistake in judgment. The Hacksaw Duggan and the Iron Sheik were feuding on TV. This is still the kayfabe era, and they're basically picked up by a cop, and they have found cocaine and marijuana on these guys. And so the Sheik, unfortunately, had to leave the company, the WWF, but he got to go around. And, you know, he goes to all these different places. It's interesting. Some of the memories are pretty buried in my subconscious. But, like I said, I looked at the Wikipedia page. He did go to World Class Championship Wrestling during these few years. He feuded, I believe, for the World Class TV title with Matt Bourne. Pretty good matchup there. I do remember him coming into WCW. I thought it was kind of a big deal. They put the Iron Sheik in a program right away with Sting, who's kind of like, kind of a patriotic type of wrestler at times with the, you know, the paint and everything. And they have this kind of short feud for the TV title. that culminates at Wrestle War 89, and the Iron Sheik wrestles Sting. So, I mean, for the TV title, did not win it. There's some insider stuff that, like, the Iron Sheik was under this contract to WCW. They really, I guess, didn't know what to do with him, or they didn't think he was in top shape. So they kind of forgot that he was under contract a few times and were paying him just to not even wrestle, but good for him. But he did kind of make a couple of good appearances. I think he took on Ranger Ross, I want to say at the Clash of Champions 5 or some such thing. He took on, this was interesting, they said that on the Wikipedia that the Iron Sheik was briefly teased as the manager for Ron Simmons, and they did a couple of interviews together. So I have to look that up. Ron Simmons with the Iron Sheik in his corner, very interesting. I think they had an interview with Paul Heyman. I'll have to look that up. I can't remember it from my own memory. But I do remember the Great American Bash 1990, and they brought the Iron Sheik out to wrestle Mike Rotundo. That card, the famous Sting beats Ric Flair Baltimore card, the undercard is really interesting. You've got Harley Race versus Tommy Rich. No Google here, folks. All fucking memory. Harley Race versus Tommy Rich. You've got Big Van Vader making his WCW debut against Tom Zenk. And you've got this really pretty interesting matchup of Mike Rotundo versus the Iron Sheik. Captain Mike Rotundo is a babyface now after his years with the Varsity Club, and he's taken on the Iron Sheik, his old nemesis from WrestleMania in the tag team division. So if you get a chance, that's why I always tell my friends, friends who just, let's go watch Flair versus Sting. I always say, watch the whole goddamn show. Watch the card. The difference is basically an analogy, if you would. If you have a song that you like, and you say, let's go listen to, Hell's Bells by AC/DC. Well, you can do that. You can just listen to the one song, and that's fine. That's part of the story. But if you listen to the whole album of Back in Black, you get the full vision of what's going on at this time. And that really works for really good albums, and that really works for wrestling cards. I mean, I try to explain to my wrestling friends, the younger guys who don't get it, they weren't brought up the same mythology I was. You watch the entire card, the undercard, the mid-card, the fucking main event, you watch them in the order they were presented. That's the way, for me, it's meant to be. And now, these days when they hot spot, they put Brock Lesnar in the opening match, or they put AJ Styles versus Seth Rollins in the opening match. To me, it's just not the same. It's kind of like starting a baseball game with a score of 5-4, and okay, then we'll take away some points, we'll add some points. It's just so disorganized, such a fucking mishmash. And that's why, wrestling fans like myself become disgruntled and disgusted, because we know better than what they're fucking doing. Anyway, going back to the Iron Sheik, to get off my fucking high horse of wrestling knowledge. The Iron Sheik, fucking NWA, does some of the independent stuff. It pops in with the AWA to attack Sergeant Slaughter, apparently. I can't remember all this stuff, but I do remember Colonel Mustafa. Now, you might be wondering, well, what the fuck is that? Well, let me trigger your memory. Sergeant Slaughter, ironically, has turned heel against America. He's beaten the Ultimate Warrior for the WWF title in the middle of the fucking Gulf War, the original Gulf War, 1991. And now, the Persian Gulf, and so now Sergeant Slaughter is the #1 heel in WWF, but he loses the title at WrestleMania 7 to none other than Hulk Hogan, and shortly thereafter, did they bring in the Iron Sheik right away? But pretty fucking soon after, they bring in Colonel Mustafa. I want to say that General Adnan was already there. General Adnan was already there with Slaughter, but after the WrestleMania 7 is backup to Sergeant Slaughter, they bring in this Colonel Mustafa character, who's obviously the Iron Sheik. I think they were trying to portray him now as an Iraqian. I think Colonel Mustafa was supposed to be Iraqian. That's why they changed the name. And, at the time and still now, the WWF does not respect the intellect of their fans. They take us for granted. They think we're a bunch of idiot McMarks. And to an extent we are, because we still support that company. And oddly enough, now look at the WWF and all their WWE and their dealings with Saudi Arabia over there. So, just interesting stuff, Vince Jr. But in any regard, Colonel Mustafa General Adnan and Sergeant Slaughter teaming up at SummerSlam 91. The match made in heaven, the match made in hell. Part of the main event, the only wrestling main event on the show. The three of them against Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior. A good friend of mine, Tommy, who I do the And Action film broadcast with, podcast, he says that this was like the first ever main event that he ever saw on pay-per-view, and this was also the first ever main event he saw on a live show, because they had the same match a few weeks earlier in Providence, Rhode Island at the Providence Civic Center. And to me that's very interesting, because it was like, who's going to beat these guys, is what Tommy was saying. That was the impression, you know. Fucking Hulk Hogan, Ultimate Warrior. Who's going to beat these guys? You know, you need 20 guys to beat these guys. Well, they only had 3. And like I said, SHEIK now is probably, he's got to be 47, 48, something like that. And then Slaughter's got to be up there, probably 43, 44 years old. General Adnan's probably deep in his 50s, probably mid-50s, something like that. So the three of them go out there, and they actually had a pretty goddamn good match. And you had like Sid Vicious or Sid Justice as the referee, etc., etc. You know the whole deal. My point is just to say, isn't it impressive? I mean, can we admit that it's impressive that the Iron Sheik is main eventing a pay-per-view in 1991 against guys like the Ultimate Warrior and with Sid in the ring, and, you know, guys of couple of generations younger than him, he's still in there. I think it's impressive. I really do. Interestingly enough, I guess Ultimate Warrior and the Iron Sheik had some outside the ring issues later on, in years that came and went later on. I think Ultimate Warrior even was contrite about it. I think there was something with the Iron Sheik at one of these conventions where a comedian kind of made an Owen Hart joke, and the Iron Sheik flipped out, and I think Scott Hall flipped out, and they were going to basically beat the shit out of this comedian, if I'm remembering that story. For fans in recent years, you know, the Iron Sheik, you know, his Twitter handle obviously was kind of engineered by the guys that made the movie. They, you know, I guess they're his managers, according to Wikipedia. But the Iron Sheik could definitely rattle off some humorous stuff. I do want to go back to a memory that I forgot about. July 1985, a young man, me. I went to Providence, Rhode Island. My mom was nice enough to take me up there for a big wrestling show. The main event, I think I've bitched about this before, was supposed to be Andre the Giant versus Magnificent Morocco. Andre was a no-show. They replaced Andre with George the Animal Steel, which is not a great substitute against Morocco. That match didn't go on last. The final match of the show was Texas Tornado Rules, Wyndham and Rotundo, having just recently regained the tag team title, defending in a rematch against Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov in a Texas Tornado match. I actually have a really good photograph. It's mostly of Nikolai with the Russian flag and the Iron Sheik. The national anthem that the Volkov would sing, the Iron Sheik, Iran, number one, Russia, number one, USA, just so goddamn funny. Okay, I was going to say this earlier, but seeing the Sheik live was great. The WWF, by that point, 85, not to go on the whole fucking anti-WWF thing again, but they did the Goonies video, the Iron Sheik, Roddy Piper, I think Nikolai Volkov, they all, Mr. Fuji maybe, Blassie, they're all in this Goonies video for Cyndi Lauper. Goonies are good enough. Yes, it's fun. But this is when the WWF especially really started breaking down those lines of, we're going to throw kayfabe out the window. And then I'm telling you, I think it really did hurt the business in the long term, because that's when your heels weren't getting that white hot heat anymore. I mean, how can you hate the Iron Sheik like you did when he beat Backlund, when now he's palling around with Cyndi Lauper? And yes, in character, he's the heel in this video. You mind, Bird? But it's just not the same. And I know that they fucking young, smart-ass wrestling fans, oh, you fucking idiots. Yes, assholes. But I mean, if you're going to suspend your goddamn disbelief, then suspend your goddamn disbelief. And that's what was great about those old-time wrestlers, like my friend Ox Baker, you know, the Iron Sheik. These guys live the fucking gimmick, and the modern day fuck fans have no appreciation, no understanding, and the wrestling promoters haven't done them any favors. And things like Tough Enough, which is, I think, is a real thing that helped bury the business. People don't realize that it did. But I mean, I don't know. It was just a different ball game. So even by 1985, just a year later, when you're putting the Iron Sheik in these Goonies videos, the action figure, the LJN action figure, probably, I mean, that's a classic. That LJN action figure of the Iron Sheik with that fucking pose, that's a great action figure. Really nice. If you have one of those, keep it in pristine shape. If you have the fucking belt that goes with it, I think it came with a tag team belt. Trust me, that's a great action figure. But the Iron Sheik, once you start to cuddle up to him a little bit, you know, you start cuddling up to those curled boots, it's just not the same. Also, the pants on the Iron Sheik, when he wore those long pants with the threading, I mean, that was great. Great look. A lot better than when he just had like the normal trunks with the fucking camel. Although I would suspect the long pants were probably a lot warmer and uncomfortable for him. But in any event, but yeah, they just, you know, and then the Hulk Hogan's Rock and Wrestling connection. Once again, it's making some of the heels likable, like kind of like cuddly. You know what I mean? What the fuck? Goddamn bird! It's like a fucking crow over there, for Christ's sakes. Anyway, so moving forth, let's talk about some of these particulars. The long pants on the Iron Sheik, you know, great look for a wrestler. The bald head, the bolo mustache, whatever you want to call it. I got to meet the Iron Sheik, Top Rope Promotions. I did commentary for them for a couple of years. Steve Ricard, the promoter. Some of you hardcore experts might know what I'm talking about. This promotion was the show. I was there the night that Scott Hall had his like kind of breakdown coming out of rehab. That was the promotion. And I will to this day defend Steve Ricard and that situation, because the fans really don't know the full story behind that. Maybe I'll get into that in another video. But for this, the Iron Sheik was there as a special guest. Ox Baker was there, my friend Ox Baker, and I got to take a nice picture with both of them. You know, I'm in the middle of Iron Sheik and Ox Baker, and they both signed it. So very proud to have that. I'm going to see if I can find that and put that on here as the thumbnail. But I mean, I'm telling you, Iron Sheik, 81 years old. I tend not to, you know, folks. I've had some deaths close to me, friends, family, in recent years, and I tend now to have a different perspective when someone passes away. I try not to get all sad. I try to celebrate, especially with someone who, look, he lived to 81 years old. That's really great for anybody, especially a wrestler from the 80s. Let's be honest. So I try to celebrate the life. This is 81 years of fucking life. I didn't even get into the amateur stuff, or the fact that he had a beautiful wife for 47 years. I forgot about this. It was in the doc. The Iron Sheik had a young daughter. He had, I guess, 5 kids and several grandkids, and one of his daughters apparently was murdered at age 26. I just forgot about that. What a sad story. But the Iron Sheik, you know, comes back for WrestleMania 17, wins the gimmick battle royal. The joke was that the Sheik had a bad hip, so they didn't want to throw him over the top rope, so they let him win the fucking thing. I think that's great. And then, you know, Sergeant Slaughter comes back and gets a few licks in on him. He's inducted to the WWE Hall of Fame in 2005. Kind of a funny speech. Like, if you want to see like older Iron Sheik at his best, look up that 2005 Hall of Fame acceptance speech. Kurt Angle. He keeps shooting on Kurt Angle. All those guys, I think Orndorff was at that one. They all kept talking about Kurt Angle. They were all market art for Kurt Angle. But I mean, the Iron Sheik, what a wonderful life. I really do want to tip. I'm going to literally put on a fucking hat just so I can tip it. An American flag hat, nonetheless. I want to tip that fucking hat to the Iron Sheik. I want to thank you guys for watching this. If you know, what else can I say? Great matches. To find the match where he beats Bob Backlund. The WrestleMania 1, Wyndham and Rotundo. Oh, I didn't even mention the first pictures I ever saw of the Iron Sheik. Him and Ivan Koloff in a Russian chain fucking bull rope match against Dusty Rhodes and Dick Murdoch in Atlanta's Omni. Iron Sheik, great career. We honor you. We thank you for your dedicated years. You can watch my Kamala tribute, my pro